All yours, Louis. We could start.
Thank you very much, Prakash. And thank you, all of you who are joining us today. And welcome to Behavioural Science Club as you all join us on this Saturday, which here in Dublin is a very wet and grey day. And maybe just you'd like to pop a note in the chat box, tell us where you're joining us from today, what the weather's like today, whether it's your first time joining us or whether you're a regular. You're all very welcome indeed. And today we are very lucky to be joined by Abhjit Bhaduri. Now, I'll just give you a little bit of background about how Prakash and I book the guests. We like, obviously, to welcome people to the group who we think you'd be interested in. And Prakash got in touch with me and said that he'd invited Abhijit to join us. And as you may well do yourselves, when you leave today, you might look Abhijit up. And I can tell you now, his LinkedIn profile is supremely impressive. Abhijit is one of the LinkedIn top 2020 voices. And he has an extraordinary 812 followers. Well, Abhijit, we absolutely bow to your most superior LinkedIn profile, but there's obviously much more to you than that. And on top of this impressiveness, I also don't mind sharing with all of you that when Abhijit and I had a little message back and forth prior to our chat today, he admitted to me he was suffering from imposter syndrome. So Abhijit, please come and join me today. And maybe you would like to introduce yourself to the group and tell them a little bit more. You're very welcome, Abhijit.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Louis, for having me. So I have been, a freelancer for the last couple of years, 5 years or so. I run a small boutique firm. We work in the area of leadership, talent, and culture. Prior to that, I was the chief learning officer for Wipro, which is an IT company which has got about 175,000 employees. It's about a $9 billion corporation. Prior to that, I was the head of HR for Microsoft and Pepsi before that. And I worked in Colgate in India, in Malaysia, in US. So that's pretty much it. I've written a little bit. I've got 2 works of fiction and 3 works of nonfiction. The first one is about hiring, how personality is a bigger determinant of success or failure. It's called Don't Hire the Best. The next work of fiction was called The Digital Tsunami, which you can see in the light blue cover behind me. That's the other book of second work, which is nonfiction. And then the last one, which I did most recently, is called Dreamers and Unicorns. So this is really my life.
A very talented man. And Abhijit, I mean, we're all here to talk and learn about behavior. And so talking about one of your particular specialist areas in HR, and we're also aware today that we've entered a new world of work. Managers are doing their best to try to engage disparate workforces, and obviously it's a challenge. And what is the secret of employee engagement, Abhijit?
I think when you look at the notion of employee engagement, the first and most essential part of it is that work itself, whatever one is doing, must really resonate with one's personality, because one of the big challenges of work when we are in our teens, late teens, if you will, we make choices which sort of, for many people, binds them down to one particular kind of a way of working. So if, let's say, someone's done a degree in engineering, for the most part, they'll spend their life being an engineer. If you've been a literature student, pretty much, that's what you're going to do. So what actually happens is, most of the times, the decision is made on the factor that this is what you can do. But everything that we can do, we may not be wanting to do. So in school, for example, I was halfway decent about math and science, but I never wanted to do it ever. I was extremely clear that I never ever wanted to do that. Um, so that interest shows up in my interest in technology today. But at the same time, when I chose a subject to study, I studied economics when I grew up, and then went on to study law and human resources. So I guess it was really driven by what I enjoyed doing rather than what I could do. So can and want to are two different elements altogether. Unfortunately, a lot of careers are built around what you can do, and which is what is the root of employee engagement. If you are just doing that, so many times you see that situation. The person says, "This is really not my passion project. My passion project is something else." So if work that you're doing doesn't resonate with you, there is no way you can feel passionate about it. So that's to me the essence of engagement.
And how important in that mix, Abhijit, do you think is the the leader, who, however you call the person who's in charge, be it the CEO or the owner? How important is that for setting the tone for the employees?
I think that in a couple of different ways, you have to look at it as a sort of a, I want to take a step back and say, work, worker, and workplace. They sort of go together. So when you are looking at the agricultural system, that's the kind of work which is being done. It needs a certain set of skills, so that's your workforce there. It's agrarian, and then the workplace is really the farm or the field, with whatever it has to offer. When you look at the movement from the agrarian system into the industrial system, and you are looking at work being done with either steam or electricity, that needs a certain set of skills, so whether it's mass production or you are talking about somebody being a shift supervisor, it's a different kind of work. And so the workplace needs to actually cater to these two things. And human resources is actually the system which is creating all these three to operate in tandem. Having said that, the role of the leader really lies in setting the intangible elements in place. What is the work culture going to be like? How much of psychological safety can you offer? How much of opportunities to learn and how much of regimentation are you going to offer? And whether that is something that the person likes or doesn't like. So the notion of building a workplace and selecting the people who find themselves in resonance with the workplace is really the job of the leader. So the more effectively the leader does it, the more engaged is the workplace, and therefore the culture is one which supports that. So one way to think about culture, it's like the soil in which you either grow a rose or a cactus. Both need very different soil conditions. So the leader decides whether I want to grow a rose or a cactus. And that is, the role of the leader.
That's a lovely image that you've given us there. And of course, you yourself are very much involved in and in favor of learning. Everybody here today is passionate about learning new things. To what extent do you think it's the responsibility of the workplace to encourage upskilling, reskilling, even learning in other areas that don't seem immediately related to our work?
So I think there has been a time when the notion of the employment contract was lifelong. People sort of had a three-stage career. So you learn, whatever you had to in college or school, wherever you're joining the employment from. You learn, then you earn, and then you retire. So it was a pretty simple three-step process. Now, when you look at it, people, they learn, they sort of join the workforce, and then suddenly, the half-life of skills is diminished. So what you're really looking to do is to actually have an overlap where your learn and earn are actually going to be alternating. It's like the soundtrack that you see in a film or the subtitles, which is going to be there right through. So people will step in and out of that workplace where you're doing something, then you're learning something, you're preparing for the future. Just before I joined this, I was in a clubhouse conversation where people were talking about, whether it is ethical for people to hold more than one job, moonlighting and something else. And because there was this whole thing that people are doing various things, that they are doing multiple jobs and they're getting more than one paycheck. But this is not something which is new. I mean, employers have been doing that. They outsource the job to a different country altogether, to a different group of people who are outside of the workforce. But when employees do it, everybody cries foul, because when and in many of the creative arts, that's how work gets done. I mean, so you have a very famous composer whose name was offered there. I'm not sure of the facts, so I'll refrain from the name, who was not given the Oscar because the person couldn't prove that the musical score was written by him, because he worked with a group of people who do that. And there are many of the writers, some of the most very, very famous writers that we know of, who sort of really churn out novel after novel every year. They employ a bunch of assistant writers or an army of writers who write the chapters. The person just looks at it, says, yeah, we will take this bit here and this bit here. So does the kind of editing and piecing together, and you have a novel ready in like 30 days. So I think there are different modes of working. So this is also a way in which people learn. James Patterson was the example that came up in that particular clubhouse conversation. So this is what it is. So if you look at it like that, I mean, it's just also doing multiple projects as a way of learning. You are preparing for the future because there is no guarantee that the employer is going to keep you forever in employment. So this is side gigs, hustles, whatever term you want to use, is just a very powerful way in which you are preparing for the future for yourself, which may actually land up with the current employer using some of it, or it could be another employer, it could be you work for yourself, or maybe it's a portfolio career that we are working towards. So reasons could be multifold.
It's a great way to describe, as you say, various different things that you're interested in, and to put it in a very positive slant. And on a completely different subject, I'd like to just talk about this being a LinkedIn top voice. Can you tell us exactly, for those of the members who are with us today who aren't familiar with it, what exactly is that, Abhijit?
Well, I think it's, some of the posts that you do, if it gets a certain kind of engagement. And I think LinkedIn looks at suckers like me who are posting something different every single day. So, if you give them a little bit of a carrot, they come back and post, for the next year as well. So I'm one of those suckers who's been given that little carrot, and be called a LinkedIn top voice. That's all that it means. No big deal, actually. It's just that I think it's about people who post regularly. I post pretty often, because I discovered this little method that, I do a lot of graphics when I take notes. So I sort of do that. So when so somebody said, why don't you post exactly these? They are so different from the others. So when I started posting that, my follower count really shot up. So I think, and then I thought, okay, so if people like it, then it's a good way to sort of share content, simplify it, and create a visual. And all my content is available for people to use free. It's Creative Commons license. So I think that's also helpful, because people can use whatever they find relevant in their work. They can do that. So I think it's just that. There's no
I think you put yourself down rather, Abhijit, but it's certainly quite a impressive thing to have achieved, and certainly your content is very interesting, always very varied, and as I say, anyone who's not familiar with the style of writing that Abhijit was describing, pop over to his LinkedIn page. And as you say, Abhijit, it's a very pleasant way to absorb information. I mean, illustrations obviously are always a tool to help us learn if we've got a visual prompt. Is it something you've always done? How did this come about, this rather attractive style of summarizing information?
So, this is a method which is called sketch notes. There are many different versions of it. I started by looking at a book by Mike Rohde called Sketch Note. He's coined this term, sketch notes, which is a way of blending in text and visuals. I started off by, following the method that he recommended. And over a span of time, I started doing it as a way of summarizing the information that I have read. So let's say if I've read a book and I kind of, it's not like a review alone, but here are the 3 or 4 things that I really would like to remember from that book. I create a little visual and I share that. So when I do that, for me, the solitary purpose of sharing that was that it becomes like a digital archive of whatever I've read. It's easy for me to look up. But when I do like every Monday or thereabouts, I do a LinkedIn newsletter. In that, what I do is whatever I'm writing, sometimes the references are not hyperlinks. They are in many cases. I of course provide that, but I also actually provide a little visual summary. So even if you didn't have to, you don't really need to click the link and read the entire thing, and you can simply take a glance at it and say, okay, I get it. This is what that reference is talking about. It's just a very powerful way of doing that. And it gives me, a way to, okay, there you go. So those are some of those. I clearly see that I've posted something twice over, but yeah, so when you do that, it's just a simple way in which you can recall information. So that's what I've done. So this is on Pinterest. You can look at the little link called Sketch Notes, and it sort of does that. If you go to abhijitbhaduri.com, that's my website. You can sort of see that. And then on LinkedIn, I do a weekly newsletter called Dreamers and Unicorns, where also I use some of these things. So that's pretty much it.
Fantastic, Abhijit. And you obviously, like myself, you read widely. Maybe would you be able to tell us a book you might have read recently that you particularly enjoyed, or a book you would recommend?
Oh, most recently, I kind of loved reading this book called Anthrovision, which is by Gillian Tett. I saw that, which came up. I thought it was really nice. The use of anthropology to decode culture. And it's nice because there's pretty much sometimes, in the work that I do on leadership, talent, and culture, you get a chance to, step into an organization and you have very little time to actually decode culture. So this is one of the useful ways in which you sort of look at many different ways. How would an anthropologist step into something and make sense of stuff? And you don't even have to be a stranger to the culture. Sometimes, you can look at your own workspace and say that, what does it say about me? Or what does it say about the organization where I'm working? I recall a small project that I had done when I was employed in Wipro. And one of the things that we had done was to look at, people decorate their cubicles in different ways. Sometimes we put up pictures of their pets, their family, their religious symbols, which are there, pictures of their vacation, various things. So the hypothesis we were trying to test is that when people decorate their workspace a lot, does it mean that they are deeply engaged and they sort of look at identifying with the culture, or is it that the person is like really restless and is likely to quit at some point of time? Can you predict? Are they better workers? What kind of conclusions can we draw? And so we had done photo ethnography project with that. And we took pictures of that. And as we were looking at that, we then went back and compared their ratings, performance ratings, and their potential ratings. And it was fabulous to actually see the correlation that people who were decorating those places a lot were people who were deeply engaged in the work that they do. They did not necessarily have, a deeper, so they were better performers, but it was not predictive of their longevity in the organization, one way or the other. Is that they've spent a long time, or they intended to stay for a long time, or that they, quit the company. So it wasn't predictive of that, but certainly predictive of the fact that they were all deeply engaged in the work. They loved their work, and they wanted to feel at home, I guess, in that setting. So that was one of the little, thingies we had done.
That's fascinating. We're always so interested in human behaviour, and that's great to hear Gillian Tett's book recommended there. I've actually just ordered that, so you couldn't have recommended it at a better time for me. Okay, well, it's been super speaking with you, Abhijit. Thank you so much. I'm going to just hand over now to Prakash, who'll chat with you a bit, and then we'll be opening up for questions from our members who've joined us today.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. For some reason, I'm not being able to spotlight two people at the same time. So I'm going to keep the spotlight only on Abhijit, because why not? All right. So, all right. I can see a couple of people here from different parts of the world. I know someone in Bulgaria right now. Latijer, I'm assuming you're in Bulgaria right now, or you're on your way out there. Sarah is not in Afghanistan right now, but she, I think, moved out to Europe long back. So a good amount of people from India. Kathleen is here from Missouri, and I think we're going to talk about anthropology sometime down the line, because she's an anthropologist with a PhD, if I'm not mistaken. And before I can see Adil is here too. Thank you all for joining from different corners of the world. Abhijit, thank you so much for being here with us. We talk about behavior change, and most of the time we're trying to make one person buy a can of a soda, or one person buy a ticket, or by using some sort of default pricing. Those are the usual cases we talk about. Or you're trying to get someone to do a small change of some sort using some sort of behavioral design. Take the stairs, put up a beautiful art out there and convince people go up the stairs. And then we have you, who has been the chief learning officer for a company where there are 250,000 people. And I think that's a lot of people. I think that's definitely a lot more people than probably the smallest countries in the world. I think, I can't hear you. I think the mic might have moved a bit. All right, I've lost your voice. Luis, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
Perfect. Yes. So you were saying something about this, right?
No, I was just saying that it's 175,000 people. So it's not...
175,000 people.
Yeah.
I think it's legit. You can start a country with that number of people, Abhijit. So what does it mean to be, when it's insanely huge, that number. We can't even comprehend, because the mind after a point, after 100 people, what do you even know what it means to talk to 170,000 people? What does it mean to be the chief learning officer of 175,000 people? What does it mean? Number one. And number two, why go independent? I think that's tied to a larger question of what is the meaning of work and what motivates Abhjit Bhaduri to say, you know what, now I'm going to do something different altogether.
Sure.
Yes, please. That's a larger question, Abhijit.
Yeah. So let me just quickly sort of respond to. So when I joined as the chief learning officer, one of the things that I thought was the person who has to do the most amount of learning is designated the chief learning officer, because you're completely clueless about what to do. So I kind of defined my role in three outcomes. The first one was, to really provide a method by which, through social listening, you are able to actually figure out some trends, some weak signals through which you can predict these are some of the pieces that are going to come up in the next 18 to 24 months, and which are potentially places where business opportunities could be there. So that's one way in which you give value add to the business. The second part of the role really lies in saying that, okay, if this is really what is going to happen in the next 18 to 24 months, what kind of skills mix would it need, which is different from what we have now, and which sort of in some sense gives you a from and to kind of a model that, you're moving from this kind of a skill portfolio to a different skill portfolio. And then you kind of say that, okay, all right, if this is where we need to go, what are different creative ways in which people can learn this faster than what they would have done by themselves. So this was really the construct of the role that I took on. And so one of the things that I thought was that, while, yes, I mean, there are, programs which are held for high potential people or classroom training, and there's some certain amount of ongoing stuff, and there are things which are there. I just thought that maybe one of the ways to get to engage people, I just saw my role really in terms of bringing the outside world into the organization. Because very often organizations tend to operate with very opaque walls. And one of the roles of learning is to bring the outside world in, and sort of which challenges your worldview, which lets you think that, okay, this is not the only way it can be done. There can be multiple ways. And so really getting people to be excited about that, I think, is one of the big roles that, learning people who are working in that field actually try to do. It was there that I kind of tried out many different things. So, I took a bunch of people, I was trying to introduce the whole notion of storytelling, and just in terms of numbers, so this was in 2009 when I joined. Today storytelling is just ever so common. But at that point of time, this whole notion was, I mean, it's such a waste of time. Why do people need to learn to tell stories? We are in the tech business. There's nothing to do with stories. But I took a whole bunch of very senior leaders who were running multiple businesses. I actually took them for an immersive experience to the Jaipur Literary Festival. In the literature festival, these people actually got a chance to meet writers. They heard about the creative process. They spoke to publishers. They looked at books. They looked at immersive conversations with various translators, writers. And, out of the group of about 25 odd people who had gone there, I would say about 15 or 17 of them came back completely enthused about the whole process of leveraging storytelling. And then they, learned more, they read more. So in that sense, very often, if you can create a trigger, which is a sort of, it triggers your curiosity, people then begin to learn on their own. So I think there is a pre-learning stage, which is, to trigger curiosity. Very often what happens is we bypass that stage, and then we straight on get on to the whole process of learning. We start teaching the person, okay, here are the 3 elements of storytelling, etc. I think that's where we miss the plot. If you are able to just redefine the role as triggering curiosity, then I think the rest of it follows, and then you can always co-create different materials and all that. That's, I think, the easy part of it. So I started using these little graphics, in my weekly newsletter. It was funny because sometimes you could really predict where the guy is thinking of quitting, because they would turn back and say, is it okay if I forward this newsletter to my, to my personal email ID? And I would say, why do you say that? So, no, just in case then I want to read it at home as well. And it was quite interesting that people wanted to take that along. So I started posting some of this content on LinkedIn as well. And that's the whole transition that, Louis was asking about. So it's really very long answer to a short question. Sorry about that.
Abhijit, let me come in here right now. I know you have to still answer the other part, but I want to tie this to the mental model that we have around learning. One of the mental model that we carry is, you're always waiting for the next level. So you are in your pre-primary, you want to go to your primary school, high school, you want to hit college. And when you write your last paper in college, one of the common experiences people is, I'm done with exams, I'm done with learning now. Here onwards, my learning is over. I am into the newer world, right? So one mental model is that we have in the pop culture, in the collective consciousness. And the second mental model that we all have is more often than not, work sucks. Unfortunately, that's one mental model that we carry around a lot, saying work sucks. It's a thing, I do it because I have no other way around it. So now if you add the two of them, and then you tell someone, right now on a weekend, there are some 30 of us apart from you out here because we want to learn from different parts of the world. But I wonder what will happen if we were told by our HR, you know what, guys? Abhijit Bhaduri is going to be speaking today. He's a fantastic person. He knows a lot. I want you all to go and spend 1 hour listening to him on a Saturday.
Nobody will show up.
And that comes the dilemma, right? So what is happening out here, and how do we then continue learning?
Yeah, so I think, when it comes to learning, organizations get it wrong completely. And I sort of, this is, of course, a very grandiose statement to make, but look at it like this. People naturally learn all the time. I mean, starting from the time when you are a kid, you learn languages, you learn how to walk, you learn how to play, is all of that. I mean, it happens and it continues to happen, except for the fact that, one of the best ways to kill your learning appetite is to incentivize it. And one of the ways organizations do that is to create a negative incentive, which is they'll say that we'll measure it. So what have you learned? Let's look at, what ways in which have you learned? We'll measure it. Have you gone from this to this? I put out a post today. LinkedIn Learning has, looked at 10 ways in which you can measure the impact of learning. Funnily enough, not one of them is a numerical response. And this is the whole point. I mean, why must everything which is interesting be killed by measuring and making it part of your KPIs? So one of the things that, which is a real curiosity killer is to say that, okay, I want you to really go and have fun every single day. I need you to keep playing. The moment you say that, people will stop playing, guaranteed, and which is what you see happening so many times with kids. I mean, there's this, somewhere in my neighborhood, I hope they aren't watching this, who takes the kid made the mistake of saying, I love, learning, I love music. So the parents said, okay, all right, here goes. And so they've taken the kid, put the kid into three different teachers. One teaches singing, one teaches the guitar, and the third one is teaching tabla. And the kid sort of is saying, oh my God, when is this torture going to stop? So what the parents have done effectively is, stopped the curiosity of this kid potentially for a lifetime. I'm pretty sure the kid is never going to voluntarily go back and, pursue music. So I think learning by itself has to be done without return on investment. Those dots will connect much later, much, much later. When I was growing up, I was really fascinated by the radio and television and all of that. I went there. I did a whole lot of things for the radio for many years. No return on it whatsoever. It had no connection whatsoever with, in any way pertaining to my work or anything. My drawings had nothing to do with the work that I was doing. But at one point of time, I thought, okay, you know what? When I am doing this work, how do I combine it for my own enjoyment? So, there was a point of time when I was in using those plastic transparencies. I don't know if you were born when those transparencies used to be used. And I started, doing little doodles and cartoons, pretty much like, is the precursor to the sketch notes that you see now. I used to do that. Not because it was, something which was told to me that, this is something you have to do, but it's something that I did voluntarily. So I think the whole process of trying out new things has to be voluntary. Otherwise, it never happens. So I think it is that element that organizations get wrong when they measure everything, incentivize. You do it, you get a gold star, you do it. And this is absolutely ridiculous. It should never be done. Never incentivize learning. People like to learn by themselves. Look at this. I mean, you talked about this whole process. Think of all the hobbies that people have, where people will voluntarily, go through hours and hours of training, which they don't get paid to do. There is no incentive. They're potentially really bad at something when they start. They go ahead and do that. About a year back, just before the pandemic hit, I had signed up for a course on, how to do video editing. I wanted to learn that. So I signed up for a proper 1-year course. When I joined there, everybody, I mean, including the professor who was teaching there, was a person way younger than me. And they would say that you aren't going to use it for any work. Unlike us, we are going to look at this as a way of earning money. Why are you doing this? So I think that's the whole point. If you take away this whole thing of, so what? I mean, why are you doing this? Why did you buy that book, which you are not going to read? It's okay. Something caught my curiosity. And now, if you look at it, it becomes a great way for me to continue to explore that. And when it's there in front of me, if you make it easy and accessible, one day I'm going to stop and read that. So it is going to happen. I'm going to flip through it. How do we pick up books to read? We flip through something and we find something interesting, we pick it up. So I think one part of it is, if you look at learning, without the trigger of curiosity, you can have all the resources in the world. It doesn't mean that you are going to use it. So you can have all the books.
Abhijit, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting again out here, because this is a very interesting conversation, very important points. There's an entire department called learning and development, in organizations. And the bigger the organizations, the more the stress the L&D team has, because you get access to Skillshare and LinkedIn Learning and 2,000 other service providers, and then you have barely 2% people signing up, and then of that, barely 6% people eventually completing a course. So what should be the format of a ideal L&D department? And guys, please have the questions coming up now. We're going to the Q&A. So what would be an ideal L&D department do, Abhijit?
Just simply, get people curious about something. Look at it like this. Learning departments will launch programs, and they expect the entire planet to suddenly get excited because I have done something, and they expect them to sign up and go through it and be enthusiastic and apply it and measure it and show dramatic improvement. It never works like that. I mean, the first part is that, think about it, the organization launches a 50 rupee soap or a $2 soap, and they'll spend thousands of dollars marketing the thing, generating curiosity. They put an ad, they get some, all kinds of things. We assume that learning is meant to be supremely boring and uninteresting. Only then it is really critical learning. So the more important it is, the more terribly boring it is supposed to be. So I think that's the first reason why people sort of do that. And L&D departments, unfortunately, get measured by people who have absolutely zero understanding of learning. A lot of people who are incentivized, who sort of get set targets for the L&D team, have never attended a program in the last 30 years in their life, and so they don't know what it means to be curious. They don't understand how people learn. They've never thought about it. But they will say, okay, we need to drive up enrollment. I mean, it's just a silly metric to use. I mean, what if you didn't have all of that? The people who are interested will do stuff on their own. And I think that's really the sole role of the organization. You cannot get, even if if it's a subject which I have no interest in, what will happen is, if you tell me there's a phenomenal, class being taken in a language which I don't understand or have no desire to learn, it's a phenomenal thing. This person is a Nobel laureate, and I'm not going to go there. So it doesn't matter. I might go there just to see who the Nobel laureate is, but I'm not going to go there to learn. So I think you've got to segregate these things. And organizations are often, the learning teams, unfortunately, get their mandate from people who have no understanding of how to learn.
Thank you. I want to talk about Dreamers and Unicorns also in detail, but
Sure.
I also want to invite Luis back here to help us with the moderation. If we are lucky, we may stay for a couple of minutes beyond 9:30 IST. If Abhijit, you have the time for 10 to 15 minutes.
Absolutely. Yes,
and then
please.
maybe at that point of time, we're going to go deeper into the book. But for now, Luis, can you please jump back in?
Of course. Thank you so much, Prakash, and thanks for that very lively, animated conversation, Abhijit. And I think we're all absolutely behind you on that concept of, as soon as you're told you have to learn something, suddenly it absolutely loses its golden glow. I don't know if it's the sort of inner rebel in all of us, but we like to study what we want to study and not what we're told to study. It's an inherent human failing, I'm sure. Shrutin, you let me know that you would like to put a question to Abhijit, so please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, Abhijit.
Hi,
I've
Shrutin.
been following your posts and sketch notes for I think about 2-3 years now, and been a huge fan.
Thank you.
I've been so I used to conduct these workshops initially at institutes, and then for some of my clients. And related to what you were mentioning about the interest to learn and the challenges of getting people to learn at companies, I kind of saw some of that in a different form, maybe where I conducted this one workshop where I wasn't informed earlier, but there were like 180 participants, I think. These are final year students, but it turned out pretty interesting because I don't know, I was trying to encourage them to kind of share. I was doing these little exercises with them where they would jot things down and then kind of generate ideas, brain writing, if you're familiar with.
Sure.
So after a point, even the more reserved kind of people started, putting their hands up and trying to share
Sure.
ideas and all of that. Later on, this was a couple of years back, I did a workshop for one of these investment banks where you had a director who had kind of worked his way up, with minimal education, kind of literally spent, the last 2.5 decades working up to that position. And we had a bunch of fresh IIM grads who'd probably been there about a year and a half or something. And similarly, when I was doing this exercise where, they had to take a couple of minutes and then kind of generate ideas based on a certain template or something, I found actually more ideas coming out of the director who had kind of slogged his way up. Whereas, I mean, so no offense to the IIMs or anything, but they almost weren't trying at all, So I was just wondering, I think there's this gap between somewhere where school or college ends and the first few years of working, where partly because of the education system, but where people kind of give up on that whole thing of, life is not, the education didn't just end like a complete phase, but I can keep learning at different phases or something. So is there, I don't know, some kind of way to fix that? Or, I mean, if you've encountered something of the sort.
Sure. I think there are a couple of different things. One is, very often for some people, the degree is a signaling device. I mean, it's not a process, or it doesn't indicate learning, because of, one of the things that people very often will say that this is not practical. We attended this workshop, but it was not practical. That's one statement which can completely kill the feedback. Reality is that if it is practical, it means it's already being used. If it is being used by you, then you are not learning anything new. I mean, so by definition, anything that you are learning has to be impractical as a starting point. The second piece is that, when you look at people have different motivations to learn. One of the ways to think about it is when they give you the instructions, when the flight takes off, and chances are that many people who have taken multiple flights in their life, they would have received the instructions on how to wear the safety equipment and all that. But you ask many of them that if there is an emergency, would you be able to do it? The answer is no. And now this is the whole point that I want to imagine. If they stopped doing this, when the flight was taking off, they stopped doing this. And they did it when they said, okay, there's an emergency and here is how you wear the thing. Guaranteed everybody is going to learn it in half a second, right? So I think there is an element of curiosity that you need to know why you are learning what you are learning. So I think that's one part of it. But then there are, when you have a high degree of openness and curiosity, there are people who are, by definition, I mean, when they are open and curious about anything, they explore a lot of things where there is no return on investment or there is no direct, so what, why are you learning to it? So when you do that, I think then that is the opportunity that I would see. So organizations, if they are able to, get people to be in that state of being more open, learning things, which means doing a cross-functional project. Now, if you say that, why am I doing a project in another department? Because I'm never going to use it. That's the whole point. That's a very transactional view of learning. Learning by definition is very, very so not transactional. So I think that's the answer.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Shruti.
Thanks so much, Shruti. Great question. And yeah, the challenge of learning, I think, is an ongoing problem that I mean, schools all over the world. There's books in the library, how to get the buggers to learn. So it's obviously an ongoing issue. Sabroto, you had a question for Abhijit. Would you like to join us?
Yes. Hi, Abhijit.
Hi.
Subroto here. Hi. I am leading innovation for GSK in US Americas region. So interesting conversation. To be honest, I didn't know you before this invite. So I'm just learning about you. I'm now a follower of you. So one question I have is regarding the learning. We can figure out what's the best way to nowadays to learn, like different. Yeah. So what's the best way to learn nowadays? Is there a different mechanism you are employing in other companies? And then what's the latest mechanism of learning, I would say? Like I've been going through different options like gaming, improvising it, or different ways of putting the things up. What is the best way you think in that direction?
So I think, I just recently, I think 2-3 days back, I think your kid wants to say hi. I totally agree with Tony that the kid is curious to see who is daddy
different
talking
world.
to.
Yeah. So you can say hi.
Hello.
So
I think there are different, so I just 2-3 days back, I did a conversation. I asked people to choose their preference from, which way they wanted to learn. The one was, and the poll is still there on my LinkedIn profile, so you can take a look at that. So the 42% or 43% wanted video as a way of learning. And it was then podcast, which is the equivalent of, let's say, one-way conversation kind of a thing. So that's 9%. So it was not very effective at all. And then you had two. One which was, people talking about short conversations, and I'll come to that in a minute. And the fourth is classroom training. Classroom training was at 22%, and the short conversation was 26%. The reason why I had asked this question is that most recently I've been experimenting with this audio platform called Mentza, MENTZA, which is fundamentally done with the idea of putting exactly 20 minutes on that platform. You ask a question which you are trying to explore, and people voluntarily come in, and it's a great way to pick up tacit knowledge or informal learning processes, which then you can then pursue and get into depth. It's not a substitute for, let's say, a full-fledged course or something, but certainly a very powerful way to learn. So it's a very new platform, barely 3 or 4 months old, but you already have about 12,000 people who are on that platform learning every single day on everything from, talking about films and wine and all of that to more serious conversations about astrophysics or books or things that they have done. There are a whole lot of them which are there. So I think the ability for people to choose, when you look at that, it's just really very powerful. So yeah, there you go. You have Madhav who says that, yes, you're familiar. It's just, it would be great to invite all of you to do a channel out there, create a daily, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever system works for you. Put a question, invite people. You may not get 1 million people on day one, but you know what? You will slowly start building an audience. And there are so many ways to do that. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock India time, I do something called blind date where, a bunch of people will sign up and you can have 5 speakers at a time. One person who is unknown to everyone who joins in and then sort of explores the topic. So tomorrow, the whole question is, have we become more conscious about our health post-pandemic? And, there are 4 people who are curious to explore that question. There's a doctor who's coming in, talking about the first-hand experience of what he or she has observed. So every time you sort of do something like that, and sometimes the questions are, academic in nature. Sometimes they are just plain curious questions, and sometimes all kinds. So yeah, I mean, I would think that social audio is probably something because it is not intrusive. You can multitask at the same time. You can listen to something, and it builds a very deep connection with the person who's speaking. So think about the connection that you've had if you've grown up listening to somebody reading the news or an announcer. It's almost like a personal relationship you have with the people. So I think there are multiple ways to use this.
Thanks a lot.
So much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for a great question, Sarota. And we're great fans of Mensa here in Behavioural Science Club. Abhijit, we had the co-founder of Mensa as a speaker a couple of weeks ago. We had Divya on here. Yeah, Divya, full of joy and life. So yeah, we had a great chat with Divya. I have a Mensa channel, Abhijit, on a Tuesday at 2:00. I'm reading through Thinking Fast and Slow, one chapter.
Oh yeah, I've seen that. I mean, that's okay. That's you. Okay, good to meet you.
So we have a question here from Rashita, and she'd like me to read it for her. So the question is, if people are not showing an interest in learning, quick to moan and complain and demand, however, that an organization does something about it, how do we think this situation should productively be resolved? I mean, that's a great big question, really, Abhijit, isn't it? But I suppose she's looking to find how can organizations encourage learning?
I think a couple of 2 or 3 different things. One, I think when the leaders themselves act as role models, I think it just makes a lot of difference to people, because then they realize that, people who are successful also are successful because they learn. Many a times with the, places where they don't really have a great culture for learning, chances are that none of these leaders, they all say, what are you doing now? You're going for some program on learning. Oh my God, you're having a holiday. Go enjoy yourself. So when they do things like that, I mean, these are some of the things I've seen in organizations where the learning culture is, really not there. So that's one. 2, I think when people pursue something, to make it super transactional. So why are you going for this particular program? What are you going to do with it? Sure, give me evidence that you've learned, put it into practice, write a, learning paper, and then give me, the return on investment. I've spent $100. Unless you show that you are putting back stuff worth 125, it's been a waste. These are all ways in which organizations have effectively over decades killed the curiosity for most employees. So these things just really, kill curiosity. That's why I said that so many people, who hold these metrics for learning and development teams are people who have never tried to explore the whole concept of learning. How do I learn? What makes me want to learn? I think that's the missing element.
Super, yeah. And I think, often you don't even realize the relevance of something you've learned until you're in the right environment to call on that knowledge. And then it'll spark something off. Somebody will say something and you'll say, oh yeah, I read something. You can't really learn nearly for something, can you? You don't know what you're going to need the learning for. It's an ongoing challenge. I'm just going to highlight there that Kathleen has told us that she has also started up a channel in Mensa. So we'll be supportive of that, Kathleen. She's her first one on Thursday. So good luck with that, Kathleen. It's a super channel. It's a super platform. I'm really hopeful for the founder. So that's really great. So I'm going to hand back now to Prakash. Thank you all of you for your great questions now. And I'll hand back to Prakash. Thank you so much, Abhijit.
Thank you so much, Louise. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Louise. And all right, Spotlights are working, lucky us. All right, there's a good thing of working with Indians. Any tech problem is eventually going to be solved. One quick question, Abhijit. I saw one of your posts and I was very intrigued by it. It said lying is a superpower.
Yeah.
Even sparingly. Can you please touch on this post for us? Okay.
Yeah. So I kind of said that, lying is a superpower because, lying has, it triggers motivation. For example, when you are hurt, when a kid sort of, stumbles and falls, most of the times the parents say, "Oh, don't worry, it's nothing, it's fine." When you do that, you kind of forget about that pain, which is momentary, and you sort of pick yourself up. Symbolically speaking, this is exactly what happens in any kind of a situation when you get started on something. We all sort of, if you don't build hope, there is no way that you will be able to complete a task. Curiosity, hope, all of that. You are doing something because you join school because you hope you are going to complete it one day. If somebody told you that, hey, you are going to be terrible and you're going to be unemployed, pretty unlikely that you will complete that task. So lying is a superpower when, a doctor, you ask a friend of mine, I was sort of, with him in the hospital during this COVID times. And I knew that he's in pretty much the final stages. And what actually happened was, unfortunately, in front of me, he was asking the doctor that, do you think I'll pull out of this entire situation? And the doctor said, of course, there are millions of people who get COVID, but all of them sort of pull through. And reality was that 2 days later, the guy was gone. Now, imagine if the doctor had said, well, realistically speaking, I don't think you're going to make it. So truth in that particular case would have really killed the little semblance of hope. So when you're doing that, when you're motivating people, when somebody says, of course you will be able to do it, it is just a very powerful way in which, you can drive motivation. So lying is that superpower. Use it sparingly, know when you are using it, and do it for the other person's good, not your own good.
Thank you. I understood you're talking about understanding contextual implications. There was another writing of yours where I saw, I think you were invoking Yudhishthira. I think it's the same one.
Invoking?
You were talking about the example of Yudhishthira?
Heuristic, yes.
Yudhishthira, the prince of the
Yudhishthira's, he was lying because he wanted to win the war. I mean, Mahabharata is a very interesting example, where when you think about traditionally, I've heard a lot of people who say that, Mahabharata was where the good guys were the Pandavas and the bad guys was Kauravas. Reality was that all the time the people who followed the rules were the Kauravas, and the ones who broke all the rules really were the people who were, the Pandavas. Krishna broke all the rules. Yudhishthira broke the rules multiple times. I mean, in my article, I sort of said that, he broke the rules almost 15 times. So I think those are things that we need to look at the context, and we sort of look at that. So that's how I talked about it.
Thank you, Abhijit. For people who are not from India, even for people who are from here, there's a lovely book, very contemporary, relevant, on the Mahabharata. I think it's by Gurcharan Das, Abhijit, if I'm not mistaken.
The Difficulty of Being Good.
A fantastic book. Abhijit has recommended it. I mean, I'm putting words in mouth. Please get your hands on a copy of that. But before that, get yourself a copy of Dreamers and Unicorn. And before we talk about the book, I want to bring in Ashwin here quickly. Ashwin had a quick question out here. Ashwin, you want to unmute and ask the question yourself?
Hi, Abhijit. Ashwin here. So I just had a quick question around the learning process, right? So we talked about having no pressure on learning, and then also about not measuring it, etc., and having access, etc. So all of this is typically available in, say, platforms like Coursera or any other MOOC kind of platforms, right? They also have engaging content through videos, etc. But still, we see a huge dropout rate of 80% plus, right? So how do you actually explain that, and in terms of the learning process itself?
Yeah. So a couple of different things. This is a fairly complex question in the sense that there are many elements to it. I would quickly call off a few of them, and then maybe another time I'm happy to take this offline and discuss with you. One of the first things is that when you look at online learning, our attention spans are substantially smaller, and yet when many of the times when organizations invite me to, do a session, they sort of say that, oh, can you do it for 3 hours, 2 hours, all of that. I think the whole issue is our online, attention spans move in chunks of 10, 15 minutes. After that, you need to do something else, and so all of that. So I think that's the first part of it. Two, I think many people, when they are teaching the content online, they don't realize that how important it is to adapt the material for the platform that they are wherever they are teaching. So for example, if you write, I may have written about the same thing in Twitter as a thread, and when I write it on, say, a blog post, or when I do a newsletter, or when I write it in a book as a chapter, each one of these formats actually has a different grammar altogether. And if you don't understand the grammar, the post I do, let's say on Insta, versus the post that I do on LinkedIn as a short post versus what I do on LinkedIn as a newsletter, every one of them is different. And we don't teach people, how to really create content for different kinds of medium. And with so many platforms available, I think it's a very big skill gap that we have, especially for people who are creating content. Three, when you have tons and tons of content, one of the biggest things that you sort of look at is that you need people who are curators. So, you need influencers who are able to say that here are 3 things that I recommend. I mean, think about the fact that you can always do a search on, what are some of the great books on behavioral science, and you can sort of read that. But I think when somebody says, here is a book that I recommend, it suddenly assumes different meaning, So those are the kind of things that, somebody who's sort of making stuff available, accessible, interesting, you have to categorize the stuff in 2 buckets. Stuff for you to complete it, go through that learning cycle, you have to have curiosity triggering you in the beginning. The content has to be interesting to be able to, for me to wade waist deep into that content. So it has got to be interesting first. And then it's got to be relevant, because then I need to be able to figure out where to use it. Remember the airlines safety, video example. Those are some of the things to keep in mind. If you do it in this 4-step process, it becomes a really powerful way in which you can trigger learning, and you don't have to really incentivize, traumatize people that you better learn, so all of that. Those are negative incentives. You don't need to do any of that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Abhijit.
Thank you
for asking that question. It's reminding me of, for some reason, Kill Bill and all those movies, all stories where you have someone who wants to learn. In this case, Beatrix Kidowitz is going out to learn from Paime. And the first thing he's doing is making her life miserable. He's extra harsh on her, very difficult on her. And the bar to, continue with the education is really high. And it's only those who really want to learn, who really want to respect the guru, the master, the shifu, are the ones who can take that kind of hardship. And that's what she does to eventually pick up, his famous skill sets. I know it is easier to be done in a movie. I get it.
No, but I think that's we have in Bollywood included. I mean, you look at all the movies which are about this whole model that there is a guy who will beat you to pulp before, you learn something. It's just such a terrible way to, as such people have difficulty feeling excited about learning. And then you kind of make it even tougher by telling people that I'm going to first punch your nose and sort of make you bleed before I teach you how to become a boxer. It's Hollywood's way of, what they think is a great motivational story. I personally think it is stupid because it puts off people. Look at the Chak De example, the guy who will hammer you to death before you do that, or the guy who teaches, Whiplash was the other movie where he's teaching the guy to do the drumming until his fingers bleed. There are many other gurus. I mean, if you look at all these masters, they've all learned from people who built the love for that. So there's a push method and there's a pull method. Pull is always, always, always self-sustaining. Push goes off the moment you take off your foot from the pedal, it's gone. which is why the moment a lot of people, when they say that, I am done with my learning, and you're right. I mean, when I finished college, I said, my God, this is the best day of my life. I don't need to learn anything anymore. Little did I realize that that's not true.
Oh, thank you. I know, Priyanka, you have a question too. We can either take up that question. Okay, let's take up. It's a fantastic question. Priyanka, you want to unmute yourself and join us?
Which one? I asked one a while back and now one right now.
Well,
whichever one you want.
Okay, so the one before was like, when do you think will be the next Renaissance? Or has it already started, and what will it look like? And the one right now was, what do you think about resilience in light of...
Let me take the first one, do a quick response. I think this is the renaissance that we are seeing right now. If you see the number of creators that we have today, it's just incredible. The number of platforms where we can create, whether it's drawing or photography. Look at the way the phone cameras have made photography accessible to people. It's no longer an art. In some sense, they have lowered the standards and made it easy for everyone to get in. But on the other hand, it's also raised the standards for you to be noticed. You need to be really good. So it sort of motivates people to be better and better and all of that. So I think that's one way. Today, you can publish your book, even if you get rejected by every publisher, you can just go online and publish your own book. You can write your own blog. You can put your own text. You can create your own newsroom. It's the age of abundance. So I think in that sense, it is the golden age of abundance that we are experiencing right now. So I certainly think I'm very lucky to be here at this point of time. On the question of resilience, I mean, I didn't quite follow the question.
It was more like coming from, you were talking about the push and the pull, right?
Yeah.
And the guru is doing beating you up. I get the beating up part is not fun, but there is a concept of resilience, right? Like
no. So it depends on what we are training for.
Yeah.
If you are training a person to become a long distance runner, you've got to sort of increase the stamina and all of that. I mean, so for example, when so I used to work out in a gym before all this happened, and then and I worked with this guy for about like 6 or 7 years, and then a lot of people would say, now what this guy's routine is, and so why do you need to continue to do this? My answer to that was that, look, every time when this guy says that, okay, you're going to do, how many crunches do you want to do today? And I would say, maybe I'll do 20. And the guy would say, okay, let's aim for 22. And then I would say, no, I don't think I can do 22. And the guy would, by the time I'm at 19, the guy would say, okay, three more, go for it. And then I would do 22 and he would say, try one more. And then effectively, I would find I've done 25, 26. I always told people I'm paying him for the last 6. I don't pay him for the first 20. That I would have done by myself. So the method of doing that. So now if you ask me, if on day 1, he said that it's 26 or I'm going to break your nose, I mean, I don't think I would have gone back to the gym again. But I think when you sort of work, so teaching is a very, very evolved skill. Most people, just because you put somebody in front of the camera or somebody in front of any situation, doesn't make them a good teacher. So in fact, many a times, a bad teacher can really put you off. I mean, think about the subjects you chose not to study in school were because you hated that teacher, right? Many a times. In my case, I gave up science because I just couldn't bear the thought of that person teaching me for 2 more years or 3 more years in this particular case. So, yeah.
Thank you for bringing up that question, Priyanka. I want to invite in Kathleen, and I'm hoping she will bring in questions connected to anthropology or to teaching. And Kathleen?
Okay, so it was way back in the beginning of your talk when you were talking about, but we've been going over and over it again, but not incentivizing and not measuring. And obviously in academics, we do that all the time. And my particular issue is with diversity, equity, and inclusion with faculty, trying to get faculty to buy into these and incorporate better attitudes towards students that don't look like them, or incorporate more relevant material into what they're teaching, and they don't want to participate or do it. And if incentivizing is bad and measuring is bad, how do you get them? I mean, how do you hit that curiosity button to get them to want to do a better job?
Thanks. So I think that's exactly why I said that teaching is, Kathleen, an extremely difficult profession, extremely difficult. I think it's one of the toughest professions to be in. And the reason is that the role of the professor very often is to first trigger the motivation of the person, sort of trigger the curiosity, not motivation, trigger the curiosity. And which is why, my son used to be really bad in math. And then there was this middle school teacher who was an extremely accomplished, I think he had a PhD from Stanford, and he was teaching math to, middle school kids. He was doing that, and he was teaching that for like 3 or 4 years prior to my son joining. And one of the best things that happened was he told, he just simply built a delightful piece. He first built a rapport with himself between him and my son, sort of, so my son was very fascinated by, magic and coins and card tricks and all of that. So after school, he sort of, said that I'm going to teach you a math trick, a card trick every time you complete the, homework and come in and you get all of it right. I teach you one of them. And he started to sort of use that as an initial trigger to build his interest in the entire process. Thereafter, my kid became so interested in math, the person actually went on to, study that later. But from the point of view of equity and building inclusion, I think that comes from the personality of the person being respectful. And I think, which is why I said it's very tough, because you have to be comfortable talking to people who are not like yourself, who don't share that same worldview.
That's the issue is with the faculty. If you have faculty who care, then they're going to do a better job, like the instructor with your son. But if you have faculty who think that, it doesn't matter, whatever my subject is, it doesn't matter how I teach it. It doesn't matter that, my class is 50% female or 60% female, and I'm only talking to the men in the class. That's the issue, is the faculty that are not doing a good job. How do we reach them if we can't say your professional development, you have got to do this, because that's negative, because you said that's a negative. So I don't know what I'm at a loss of how do we get the faculty who need to be educated, who need to get their own curiosity stimulated. I've tried so many things. I'm at a loss.
Which is why they say that sometimes the shoemaker's children have no shoes. That's the reason why they say that very often the people who are teaching are the ones who aren't learning enough. Because, teaching and learning are two sides of the same coin, because for the students to become better learners, when they teach, they become better at learning. In the same way, when the professors become better at learning, they become better teachers. So I think it's really the whole process of doing that. And being aware of your unconscious biases, I think, is a lifelong journey, so it's something that we all need to become aware of. And how do we work with people who don't look like us, who don't sound like us, who don't speak like us, and who don't share the same values as us? It's very, very hard for people to sort of do that. So openness, which as people, When the more open you are, the better you are at learning. So the teachers who are good at learning are the ones who are more open. So unfortunately, that's the paradox. The
So
ones
we
who
have
need
to
to
go
do it
back to
most.
like the hiring and put that into the hiring of the professors. So the professors have to display openness and compassion and desire to keep learning, or they don't get hired. Maybe that's what we have to do, or they get fired.
Or that you get a teaching license for just maybe a year or two, because everyone knows that the skills have a very short lifespan today. So why not do that? Give people a teaching license for 2 years, and you can renew. It's like a driving test. If I have a couple of accidents, then what do? You take away my driving license. So why is it so hard to do in case of teaching? After all, they are sort of teaching the kids. So why should they not, or adults, but why should they not be subject to the same measures? So
if I may interject with another point of view out here, unfortunately, in many parts of the world, Kathleen, teaching is not seen as the profession to aspire to, which means, the premise of our question here is coming from the fact, and Abhijit, please correct me, you know a lot more about this than me. The premise is coming from the fact that you want the teachers to be really good, the best folks to go down who understand, and then they become teacher, who in turn teach well. Unfortunately, the best of us do not really aspire to be teachers. And there could be 2,000 reasons behind it. I am told that I think in Korea, South Korea, teachers are one of the highest paid profession. I could be wrong. Some of you do Google search and correct me. But that's not the case in most part of the world, including US and India. Abhijit, back to you here.
That is true.
Yeah, it's very true, Prakash. I mean, just in terms of data points, I mean, in every civilization, the most aspirational jobs get paid the most. In the Greek, at the time of the Greek Empire, when it was flourishing, philosophers were the highest paid, which is why you saw so much of great philosophers emerging from that. Look at it like this. The moment, in India, you play a certain game, like you have the game of cricket, which gets so much of sponsorship that it attracts the best of players. People strive to be at their best, and they compete, and you create an ecosystem which supports that. Today, because of that ecosystem, today it is possible for India to have the equivalent of almost 4 or 5 Test cricket teams, with the IPL, etc. going. So you have to raise the bar and incentivize people to aspire to that particular process. So you would have to sort of do that. Better pay for sure, but also higher standards, evaluation on a periodic basis. And I think many of the things, there are different reasons why, different structural challenges, like there are teachers unions who will sort of allow or not allow certain kinds of things to be done. So I think it's a more complex question than, we are taking a 50 variable equation and sort of solving for one variable. Pay is just one of them, but I think there are many other elements. Social signals, there are the kind of people, the methodology, the amount of creativity that they do. So a lot of it, and D&I, diversity and inclusion, is not necessarily one of the criteria by which somebody gets tenure or doesn't get tenure. So there are multiple scenarios which need to be addressed. What are we incentivizing and what are we getting out of it?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you
for bringing that point of view. There are also these mental models we walk around with in societies. Like, there's this line just thrown out very casually, which says, those who can do, those who can't teach. And it's a line you can throw away casually out there. But what is the implication of a line like that, Abhijit?
And which is why I said, I mean, there are multiple variables to that equation. One of which is that social signals. So you did mention that those who can think about it. You get a professor to come in and teach. And I've seen this happen. Lost track of how many times I've seen this happen. You get a professor from any one of the places, somebody who's a real superstar in their discipline. You get them to come and teach a bunch of executives who probably have never read a book in the last 20 years, and all that they have to do is to just shrug their shoulder and say, oh, it's very academic. And that's the end of that. I mean, that prof is never going to be called back again. And that's the way we've sort of looked at terms like impractical, is very theoretical, it's academic. These are really polite abuses. So therefore, when you have things like that, that's why I said that, one of the first things you should look at is the person's teaching completely impractical, because that's the only way you are learning something new, because you've never been able to put it into practice. Now you grapple with it and figure out how do you put that. Yeah, that makes sense. But if you teach something which is practical, the whole world is doing it. Why would you, need somebody to teach you that? You can just see somebody else doing it and do it yourself.
Thank you. Very engaging. We have stayed some 20 minutes past our usual time, and a couple of us have to go. But let's take 2-3 minutes more before we go. One of the last thing when I touch is there is this entire beautiful theme when you're talking about dreamers and unicorns, your book. And I remember another conversation with you where you were talking about 5 shifts.
Yeah.
To watch out for, and I've just got my hands on a copy of the book. And as I do typically, I take a look at the contents just to have a small idea. And there was something very interesting which I saw. It said, life is a series of S curves.
Yeah.
Can we touch that one? I'm not ready as yet, but before we go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, S curve is really, if you look at an S, when you look at growth over time, what happens is that when we start doing something, we struggle in the initial phase. So it's a very flat curve. So you aren't making much progress. And then there's a point of time when you really figure it out, and then you kind of grow rapidly. So then you sort of go up that S curve. And then there's a point of time where you get jaded and faded, and you kind of say, I've seen it all, done it all. And then you kind of plateau. Now, there are organizations when, they get started, they really start to do a number of different things. They become innovative. And then there's a point of time when they really, as they are growing, they become complacent. And so they stop growing. And that is exactly the challenge of the S curve, is that you need to be able to actually start the next S curve when you are still climbing the first one, so which means when you become, let's say you've spent 2 or 3 years in your workspace, this is the perfect time to start thinking, what if this particular job was not to be available to me ever again? What would I do then? And then you start thinking of the skills I would need to build, and you sort of build on that. So when you start doing that on a continuous basis, you keep renewing yourself, because as the shelf life of the skill drops, you're still good enough to go for the next couple of years. So that's how I would look at it.
Folks, get your hands in the book. I'll be sharing a link again in the post out there. I've had a couple of conversations in the past. I've read excerpts. I've got my hands in the book. I'm very excited. Primarily with a very important concept, which is around what it means for us to work in today's world. There's a phrase people in the startup industry might be familiar with. It's called a 10x programmer. A programmer who is so powerful that he can do the job of 10 programmers. That means he can be the one person who can change your product, right? Think Clubhouse, or think, a good product which comes up and, wow, someone did that. And Abhijit loaned me this phrase called a 10x learner, and I borrowed it. And let's get our hands on the book. Let's go through it in detail, and then see what it has got to teach to us, about new work culture, about 5 fundamental shifts to keep an eye on, what it means to be a learner, how do we learn in today's world. And I think even a very fundamental question, why learn at all? Do we even need to learn? So I think the book is going to take us on that journey. We're very excited about it. Abhijit, before you go, is there any final, anything you want to say, any one thing you want to share, tell, advice to us?
No, I'm no one to advise. I think we have much people way smarter than me out here. And so, I'm no one to advise. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn. My newsletter is there, and, my LinkedIn. So please do connect up. I'll be happy to answer any questions I haven't had a chance to answer here. Thank you very much for being here. I just am deeply grateful that you took time and sort of you are spending time voluntarily. I hope it was worth your while.
Thank you so much. And everybody else, stay safe, wear your mask, get your jabs. It's a good thing. I'll see you all next Saturday, same time. And it's a surprise guest for next Saturday. Yeah, as always.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you so much for joining me.